In the summer of 2016, Emily Hartwell arrived in the city with nothing but a suitcase, a college degree, and the kind of bright hope that only youth can carry. She had grown up in a quiet town where everyone knew everyone, and the city felt like a whole new universe waiting to be discovered. At 23, she was determined to make a name for herself in fashion. She took a job at a boutique downtown, folding clothes, arranging displays, and smiling at customers with the charm of someone who believed she was destined for something bigger. It was there on an ordinary afternoon that she first met Charles Beaumont. He was 60 years old, tall, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who had built empires and crushed competitors. To most people, he was more than just wealthy, he was an institution. His name appeared on the sides of skyscrapers, his face in the society pages, and his donations kept politicians eager to shake his hand. He had power, and everyone knew it. Emily had no reason to expect he would notice her, but when he walked into the boutique and saw her arranging a window display, his gaze lingered. Charles struck up a conversation, asking about the clothes, about her work, and finally, about her ambitions. Emily, caught off guard by his attention, found herself answering honestly. She wanted to design clothes, to see her name on labels, to escape the small-town life she had left behind. Charles smiled, and in that smile was an unspoken promise he could make those dreams possible. Before leaving, he handed her his card, the gold lettering heavy with importance, and told her to call if she ever wanted a guidance. For a week, Emily hesitated. She told herself she didn't need help, but the allure of opportunity gnawed at her. Finally, she dialed the number. The next evening, she found herself sitting across from Charles in a candlelit restaurant she could never have afforded on her own. He ordered for her without asking, spoke with authority, and made her feel as though she had stepped into a different world. When the bill came, he paid without a second glance. By the end of the night, Emily felt like she was already living the life she had always imagined. The dinners became frequent, then turned into trips to galleries, theaters, and eventually weekends at Charles's estate outside the city. Each time he introduced her to influential people, designers, investors, socialites, who treated her with sudden respect simply because she was at his side. For Emily, it was intoxicating. She believed she was building connections, that this was the path to her future. But beneath the glamour, there was something unsteady. Charles was much older, and his attention came with a weight she didn't fully understand. He bought her gifts she didn't ask for, arranged her schedule without consulting her, and reminded her often of how lucky she was to have his interest. Friends began to worry. They whispered that Charles had a reputation, that younger women often drifted into his orbit and just as quickly disappeared from public view. Emily brushed it off. She told herself they were jealous that she was different, that this was her chance to rise. What she couldn't see then was that her meeting with Charles Beaumont wasn't the beginning of a love story or a career breakthrough. It was the first step into a world where wealth and power would define every choice she made, a world where she would no longer be in control. By 2017, Emily's life looked perfect to anyone standing on the outside. She was no longer the small-town girl folding shirts in a boutique. She now lived in a glass-walled penthouse that overlooked the city skyline, drove a car that gleamed like a mirror, and appeared in photographs from society events where champagne flowed like water. Her social media accounts filled with curated glimpses of this glittering lifestyle: designer clothes, candlelit dinners, and faraway vacations. Charles told his staff and acquaintances that Emily had left him during the night, claiming she wanted freedom and no longer wished to live under his roof. He insisted she had taken some of her belongings and vanished without warning. To casual listeners, it sounded like the impulsive act of a young woman overwhelmed by luxury and control. But when Emily's family was contacted, they immediately dismissed the story. She had spoken often about feeling trapped, but never once about leaving her family behind. She called her mother weekly, and she had been planning a trip home in just a few weeks. None of that matched with a sudden disappearance. The police were alerted within days, but the investigation faced hurdles from the very start. Charles's standing in the community meant every step forward was weighed against potential backlash. Officers questioned him, but his answers were smooth, practiced, and delivered with the calm confidence of a man accustomed to avoiding consequences. He told them Emily had been emotional, even reckless, and that she likely left in the heat of the moment. He painted himself as a heartbroken man abandoned by the woman he adored. Still, pieces of the story didn't align. Emily's passport was found untouched in her apartment. Her credit cards and bank accounts showed no activity after the night she vanished. Friends confirmed she had spoken about wanting to break free, but she had made no arrangements to disappear completely. The simple truth began to take shape. Emily had not run away. Something had happened to her that night. The more investigators dug, the more questions emerged. Where had Charles gone after the gala? Why were there no records of Emily booking a flight, calling a cab, or reaching out to friends? The answers remained elusive, hidden behind Charles's wealth and influence. Without concrete evidence, the case stalled, teetering on the edge of becoming another unsolved disappearance in a city full of shadows. But suspicion lingered. For Emily's family, every day without answers was agony. For the public, whispers began to grow louder. Had Charles Beaumont, the man who seemed untouchable, been responsible for making her vanish? For months after Emily's disappearance, Charles Beaumont managed to maintain his carefully crafted image. He spoke publicly about how devastated he was, how much he missed her, how he wished she would come home. He donated to charities in her name, ensuring his reputation as a generous benefactor remained untarnished. To those who didn't know the full story, he seemed like a grieving man doing his best to move forward. But beneath the surface, investigators were quietly gathering fragments of information that began to paint a very different picture. The first break came from security footage. Cameras positioned near the gala where Emily was last seen captured Charles' luxury car leaving shortly after midnight. While that detail matched his account, additional footage placed the same car hours later, traveling along a deserted road leading to a remote property he owned outside the city. He had not mentioned going there, and when asked directly, he flatly denied it. That denial became the first crack in his seemingly flawless story. The data confirmed he had been in the vicinity of the property during the critical hours after Emily was last seen. Confronted with this, Charles's attorneys dismissed it as irrelevant, arguing he often visited his property late at night to clear his head. The explanation sounded rehearsed, but with no direct evidence of wrongdoing, police couldn't press charges. It wasn't until a search warrant was approved that investigators gained access to the property. The sprawling estate included an abandoned guest house and acres of forest. It was here, near a fire pit behind the building, that they uncovered something that changed the trajectory of the investigation. A partially burned handbag containing fragments of fabric and melted plastic. Among the debris, they recovered a charred metal clasp engraved with Emily's initials. News of the discovery was kept quiet at first, but whispers spread. Charles's team claimed the items could have been planted by someone eager to tarnish his reputation. His allies in politics and business echoed the same sentiment, suggesting the investigation was nothing more than an attempt to smear a powerful man. Pressure mounted on law enforcement to proceed cautiously, and some officers admitted privately that they feared their careers would be ruined if they pursued the case too aggressively. Meanwhile, Emily's family clung to hope that justice would be served. They attended every press conference, pleaded for answers, and kept her story alive in the media. Their persistence forced the investigation to remain active, even when it seemed destined to fade away. The public began to take notice, questioning how a wealthy man could remain untouched despite evidence pointing toward his involvement. For all his resources, Charles could not control the small inconsistencies that slipped through. He claimed Emily had packed a suitcase before leaving, but no luggage was ever found. He insisted she had been unhappy, yet her journals, later recovered from her apartment, revealed her plans to reconnect with friends and start fresh. Each revelation chipped away at the image he had built, exposing a man more concerned with protecting his name than finding the woman he claimed to love. The case had become a battle between perception and truth. On one side stood Charles, cloaked in wealth, power, and influence. On the other were fragments of evidence, grieving relatives, and investigators unwilling to let the trail go cold. The more the story unfolded, the clearer it became that Emily's disappearance was not a mystery of chance, but one of control, power, and a man convinced he could hide the truth forever. Just when it seemed that Emily's case would dissolve into rumor and speculation, an unexpected voice stepped forward. A man who had once worked for Charles Beaumont contacted investigators, claiming he could no longer live with the weight of what he knew. He had been employed as a groundskeeper at the remote property, and on the night Emily vanished, he was summoned there under unusual circumstances. What he revealed would finally break open the carefully maintained illusion of Charles's innocence. The man described arriving at the property shortly after midnight. Charles had been waiting, agitated and demanding. He ordered the groundskeeper to dispose of what he called a problem, without offering further explanation. Terrified of losing his job and wary of Charles's influence, the man complied with vague instructions, helping to cover something heavy near the edge of the woods. At the time, he claimed he did not know what it was, and fear kept him from asking questions. But in the weeks that followed, guilt gnawed at him until the weight of silence became unbearable. Guided by his testimony, investigators returned to the property. After days of careful searching, cadaver dogs alerted near a shallow, hastily concealed grave. When the soil was removed, skeletal remains were uncovered along with jewelry and clothing fragments that matched Emily's belongings. Forensic analysis confirmed the identity. Emily Hartwell had finally been found. The news was devastating to her family, but also offered the closure they had been desperately seeking. She had not run away, she had not vanished into thin air. She had been buried in the ground by the man who claimed to love her. The discovery shattered the fragile defense Charles had clung to. Followed. His protests of innocence sounded hollow in the face of physical evidence. He was arrested, his image as a respected businessman and philanthropist collapsing overnight. The same media outlets that once praised his generosity now broadcast the details of his fall from grace. The community that had shielded him for so long could no longer ignore the truth. The whispers turned into outrage, and the pressure to hold him accountable grew too strong for even his most loyal allies to resist. The trial that followed captivated the nation. Prosecutors laid out the timeline with painstaking detail. The strained relationship, the control Charles exerted, the lies he told about Emily's departure, and the undeniable trail of evidence linking him to her death. Witnesses testified about his temper, his need for control, and the chilling threats he had made in private. The defense tried to paint Emily as unstable, suggesting she may have met with danger elsewhere, but the remains in Charles's own property spoke louder than any argument. When the verdict was finally delivered, the courtroom fell silent. Charles Beaumont was found guilty of murder, sentenced to life in prison without parole. For the first time, his wealth and influence could not protect him. Behind bars, he continued to insist on his innocence, claiming he was the victim of a conspiracy, but outside the prison walls, few believed him. Emily's story lived on, a stark reminder of how easily power can silence truth, and how dangerous it is when wealth is allowed to overshadow justice. Her name became a symbol of resilience, her family turning their grief into advocacy for women caught in similar webs of control and manipulation. Though her life was cut short, the truth that finally emerged ensured that she would not be forgotten.